got so enthusiastic about aviation, he wrote a book, and he speaks on the topic. Welcome to Redbird Migration, Patrick. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much to you and to Redbird for inviting the new guy to come and talk to you. I got my private pilot's license in 2021. I'm probably the least experienced pilot in this entire room. So I'm very grateful to be invited to come talk to you about my journey and what that experience was like and what I took away from it. When I published the book back a little bit before Christmas, I gave a copy of it to my 11-year-old daughter, and she thumbed through it, and I asked her, "What do you think?" And she thought for a moment, and she said, "It would be interesting if I were interested," which I think is probably the most honest book review ever. And it's something maybe I should put on the back cover. Right now, the back cover has a very generous quote from Craig Fuller from Flying Magazine. But I think maybe I should put that on. But I know that all of you are interested, so maybe you're a little bit easier audience than she was. This was not the book that most of my friends and associates ever expected that I would write. I'm an economist. I spent much of my life and career in China. So people who knew me expected me to write a book about that. And instead, I went in a very different direction, very unexpected for me. And I'll talk a little bit about that story. I'll talk about why I wrote the book and for whom. And I'll finish by offering a couple of thoughts about reality and virtual and the relationship between them, because flight simulation played a key role in my journey, and I think it's going to pose both challenges and opportunities going forward as we enter this new age of virtual reality. So how did I become a pilot? If you had told me a couple of years ago that I'd be up on a stage giving a speech in front of a DC-3, I'd say, about what? I never dreamed, until I was about 50 years old, of flying an airplane. It was simply not something that I had thought that much about. It wasn't a lifelong dream. It was something other people did. And in fact, even my early experiences with flight simulators on PC kind of intimidated me a little bit. I thought that's really not for me. I flew, like many people, on commercial airplanes. I found it a little disconcerting because I didn't really know what was going on. I was a bit of a nervous flyer, but I never expected to become a pilot until COVID hit. And just as Craig mentioned that it got him back into aviation, for me, I was living in New York City, locked down with my family. It's wonderful to be with your family, but 4 months, a little bit, people get on each other's nerves. And I love to travel around the world. I had trips planned to Tajikistan and to India with my family that were canceled because of COVID. And one day, around June of 2020, I was sitting with my son, looking at YouTube, checking out YouTube videos, and we came across the promotional video for Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. And I was astounded at how photorealistic it was. And it seemed like a wonderful way to sort of travel in a way that I couldn't travel. But I said, my son asked me, "Well, are you going to get it?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I'd have to learn how to actually fly the plane, at least on the computer, and I'm not sure I'm really up to that." But didn't have much else to do, so I took the plunge. And as I got into playing this game, I had a lot of questions. Why do you do this? What happens when you do that? What do you talk to air traffic control, what do you say? How do you approach a runway to make a landing? I didn't know the answers to that, so I started looking at YouTube and started gathering answers. And some of the answers were there and some weren't. So I ended up buying a online ground school course just to answer my questions, just to learn a little bit more about something. And COVID was sort of an opportunity to do that, to go off in a different direction and explore something and keep yourself sane. Well, when you watch these videos in online ground school, they talk about, well, when you're in the cockpit with your instructor and when you're coming into land, and I thought, these people expect me to do this. So maybe I should. Maybe I should give it a try. I'm learning all this stuff. Maybe I should do it for real. And I went in October of 2020 for my discovery flight. And a year later, I got my license. Many people have this question, where did I do it? I did it at a very small flight school out of Lincoln Park, New Jersey. And when the weather got very bad in March, and I got very frustrated because my first solo kept on getting pushed back and back because of the wind and weather, I ended up going to Scottsdale, Arizona, to a much larger flight school for a week. So I got kind of a range of experiences with small and larger flight schools as part of the journey. And that was the process that brought me to get my license. Now, along the way, flight simulation played a vital role, not just as the initial inspiration, which it was. That was the thing that got me hooked and interested in it, made it seem possible to do. But also, throughout the process, it was really a very, very useful tool. One was, and I think something that people practice on a simulator quite a bit, is the pattern and landing. And one of the things that really struck me was in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020, the photorealism was just a huge step ahead. Not only could I practice doing the pattern out of my airport, but I could actually recognize all of the landmarks which I paid attention to in real life. I could see them. They were there. They might not look exactly the same, but they were very recognizable. And so when I actually did my first solo, people asked, what was that like? I said, it was like being in a simulator, especially when I started using the VR goggles at home to practice. Of course, one of the frustrating things about learning to land is weather, and how you may, if you're not in Florida or if you're not in Arizona, how you have a lesson scheduled. Maybe you make 2 or 3 scheduled lessons and they all get canceled because the weather doesn't cooperate, and you're sitting there stewing on the ground wishing that you could work on what you learned last time and see whether you can improve. And I had almost a whole month go by at one point where I couldn't get in the cockpit. But what I could do was work in the simulator and practice every day, both directions. Whichever direction I chose didn't depend on the weather. And in a photorealistic environment, and one in which I had eventually the VR goggles on, which felt extremely real. So when I sat there ready for takeoff in my in the real Cessna 172, and I looked at that seat next to me and it was empty, at first I thought, oh, okay, there's nobody here. But then I said, I've seen the same thing. I've gone through the same thing in the simulator, in the virtual reality. It's exactly the same thing, and it proceeded exactly the same way. I also would say I'm astounded by the accuracy of the flight model as well. Maybe a few seconds off in the climb, but not much. Very, very accurate to what I experienced. In fact, the variations that you would experience due to weather are actually greater than the variation in the sim versus reality. Another thing that it helped me with was talking to air traffic control. I talked to a CFI one time later, and he said, people who start off at towered airports are terrified of untowered airports, and people who start off at airports are terrified of powered airports. And I was in the latter camp. I had learned out of an unpowered airport. And so as I progressed, talking to air traffic control, it seemed very, very intimidating. And especially when I went to Arizona. And I bought into a subscription package that allows you to fly in Microsoft Flight Simulator or other types of PC-based sims and talk to a real professional air traffic controller at the same time working through your flight. And within about 2 weeks, I got over that hump. It made a huge difference in terms of my comfort level because I began to recognize the patterns and then the deviations of the patterns in this new language that I was speaking. It was so useful that when it came time for me to do my solo cross countries, I actually pre-flew them on Microsoft Flight Simulator. It was part of my flight planning process. And as I pre-flew them, I took some screenshots out the left-hand window to recognize some of my landmarks. And then when I actually flew the flights, I took a couple of photos, exact same photos, and I have them in the book comparing the two. And it's hard to tell the difference between what was the screenshot in the sim and what was in reality. So it was very helpful to pre-fly in the simulator. Another thing that it helped with was weather and the ability to encounter and experience weather conditions that I would never want to get up in real life, especially as a VFR pilot, but that it was useful to experience on the sim in a photorealistic way. So there were two experiences that I had that I talk about in the book. The first was flying over the Alps and encountering icing in a Cessna. You want to fly over the Alps in a Cessna, but in the sim it's possible. And the experience of what that was like and what it did to the plane drove home a real message about the dangers that involved. And then the second thing was when I flew home, the last chapter in my book is about flying home from my check ride and encountering near IMC conditions and what I did about that. But the experience of flying in IMC or near IMC conditions in the sim helped me recognize that as it was starting to take place and then deal with it and cope with it and understand what the dangers were and what my options were to get me out of that situation safely. So that experience of being able to kind of push the boundaries in virtual reality, even into the danger zone, so that you can stay out of the danger zone in real life, that was very, very helpful to me. Why did I write this book? On the last panel, they talked a bit about how many people drop out, how many people walk in, have a discovery flight, even get their student license, maybe even take the written exam, but never complete their license. And I talked to a lot of people as I was writing the book who said to me exactly that. Oh, I soloed once, but then other things happened and I never completed it. Why? Craig may have the answer in terms of his data to explain why people do that. I can only give my impressions of why people drop out. It's part of it, yes, is money, time, sure, but people who are determined, those things are not really obstacles in the end to getting it done. I found that aviation, learning to fly, was very intimidating, and it was very discouraging at times. And if you know people in your family or close friends who fly, are pilots, then maybe there's that support network to kind of give you guidance and give you encouragement when you need it and be able to talk to somebody about it. I didn't have that. And I think a lot of people who come from my position, not being inside aviation already and not having family ties and experiences, they don't have that either. And learning to fly can be a very lonely thing then, you're not able to share what you're learning. You're not able to share what your frustrations are. You're not able to share what your accomplishments are with people who understand it. After I wrote the book, my wife sat down to read and help me proofread it. And afterwards she said, I didn't know you were doing all this. And now I understand it. And now we can have a conversation about it. And that was great. So the goal, one of the goals of writing the book was to provide people with a roadmap, some idea about what this path is that they're embarking on. You'll see it. It's not a thin book. It's 400 pages, including a glossary at the end. It's not just sort of a pat on the back. I had a great experience learning to fly. I work through all the knowledge areas that someone learns in basic private pilot education. And instead of it being a textbook, it's part of a story. And so it can be sort of a companion to somebody who is either thinking about going through it or actually going through it and wants to know what are the ups and downs, what is there to expect. In the early presentation, the initial presentation at the beginning of the day, there was a chart that showed that the thing that people rated the most important thing for pilot success or student success was student prep, being prepared, knowing what to expect when you go into the cockpit, having a little bit of background about what you're going to encounter. That's part of that preparation. And I even think that this kind of book is the sort of thing that I would want to give everyone who finished their discovery flight. To say, bring it home as a memento, and it's a reminder. It sits there. You have your peak interest. You've just had an incredible experience. You don't know whether you really want to follow it up or not. And here it is, sitting there on your table, beckoning you, saying, there's so much more to learn, and here's what the path will be like. And when you just get discouraged, here's what the path is going to be like and how you can overcome some of those downs and what the reward at the end is going to be. The other type of reader it was written for was just people who don't even intend to learn how to fly. We all fly, and I'm not talking about the people in this room. Obviously, you all fly as pilots, but everyone outside of this room, we all get on airplanes and we travel, and yet it's a constant part of modern life. And yet we either tend to take it for granted, or we see it as completely unapproachable and intimidating, and no one could possibly understand it. And that's why people either don't think about it when they're flying, or when they do think about it, it kind of makes them nervous and concerned because they don't understand it. And so part of this was an effort to share with a broader audience outside of aviation what it is that this modern marvel that we do, this part of modern life, is all about, and how do people actually learn to do it. I read books about medicine, not because I want to become a doctor, but because it's part of modern life and I want to understand it. And I thought the same thing is true of aviation. And this has led to an audience for the book that I did not anticipate, which is a lot of people who are buying it are either students or pilots who want to share it with their family. They want their family members to read it because it's part of sharing the experience of what they're learning. So they can have a conversation with their spouse or with their child or with their parents about what it is that they're going through. And there's at least some level of understanding about what it is that this thing that's so central to your life at this moment, what it is that you're experiencing. I'll conclude by talking a little bit about virtual reality and the virtual versus reality, because that's what flight simulation is about. Ultimately, it's about this direction that we're taking towards virtual reality, experiencing things digitally instead of necessarily physically. And there's a lot of concern that people have. I think it's a legitimate concern about what virtual reality is going to do to us, how it's going to change life. There's that book and movie that you may have seen, Ready Player One, which paints a dystopian image of a world in which people are constantly logged into their virtual reality machines while their actual lives, and they live their entire lives in virtual reality, and their actual lives are kind of miserable. And even short of that, I can see, as somebody who enjoys computer games and wasting a lot of time playing computer games, how easy it is to fall into the trap of virtual accomplishments. Finishing a mission or finishing a level, getting some kind of gear on a computer game. But that time spent that you were doing that might have been spent doing something in real world. And that's not even to go into the issue of human relationships and as a replacement for virtual relationships as a replacement for real relationships. So even in my own experience, in my own industry, which is finance, there's concern about gamification. Some of these stock brokerage apps intentionally use methods from the gaming world and from casinos to encourage people to just do that one more thing, to be that mouse that hits the lever, to make one more trade or one more transaction that isn't necessarily part of a long-term strategy. So games can be a distraction, they can be destructive, they can put us in directions that aren't necessarily productive for our real lives. But this was an example in my own life of a situation where the ability to experience something virtually actually opened the door to a real-life experience that I might not otherwise have undertaken. That because it lowered the barriers to me getting into the cockpit, a whole new world was opened up for me. And that's where I think it's useful to think about maybe a more positive view of what virtual reality can become, which is opening doors for people to do things in real life that they otherwise would not have experienced. And I think aviation provides an excellent area where perhaps that can be realized. Thank you very much for welcoming me. And the book, by the way, is available on Amazon. You can find it there. I do have some copies that I'd be willing to share with folks here, but they're limited. But I hope that it is useful for people. And I hope that it brings, when I wrote it, I said if it really brings one person, hopefully more than one, but if it just brings one person to do something that they otherwise wouldn't have done and experienced, then that's why I wrote it. And thank you very much. And I'm happy, if there's time, to answer any questions you might have. I can't.
How many chapters did you fill about your significant spouse complaining about the cost of flying? Because I could fill up 3 books.
Not much, and that's due to my wife's indulgence of my curious nature. Maybe she figured that if I wasn't doing this, then I'd be traveling off somewhere. And it's interesting because when I wrote the first draft of the book, someone asked me, well, did you have the conversation initially just about safety with your family, that you were going to get in an airplane, and what did they feel about that? And I said, no, I actually didn't. And I went to my wife feeling kind of guilty, and I asked her, should I have had that conversation with you? And she said, no, I know you. I know that I know you're generally kind of conservative and cautious person, and you wouldn't be doing something crazy. But no, fortunately, I came from a family that was very, very supportive, even if they didn't really understand what the heck I was doing.
Hey, my name is Laura Bray, and I own IFR 6, and I loved your story. I love how it resonated with not having the backing of people that understand kind of what you're going through, not having any type of aviation foundation within your family. But my question to you is, how interested are you in getting your actual instrument certification?
I am very. I was occupied writing the book. I live in New York City, which is a terrible place to try to learn, because it takes an hour out of the city to do anything, to reach somewhere where you can train. And I also had some health experiences recently, which fortunately I'm recovering from. I was walking around with a broken neck for several years and didn't realize it. So I had some emergency surgery. So all of those things have pushed off what I'd love to do, which every pilot immediately after congratulating me on my check ride told me I must do, which is number one, get your instrument rating, and number two, learn how to learn how to land the tail dragger. So both of those things they told me go do.
Well, great. Yeah, if you have a minute after you get off the stage, I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about some options that may be available to you.
That'd be great.
Thanks.
So just a comment and then some questions about your book. I'm an instrument instructor. You need 40 hours of instrument instruction minimum to get your instrument ready. Do 20 of those hours in an approved simulator like a Redbird, FMX, AATD. I do that. Yeah, and I'm not employed by Redbird. My nonprofit owns one. We use it extensively. Believe me, it's the way to learn instruments. I'm sitting here on my iPad scrolling through the Kindle version of your book. I want to compliment you. This is a remarkable achievement. It's remarkable because it captures for a layperson what learning to fly is all about. So congratulations, you did that. And I just have some questions. Did you go over this material with your flight instructor or flight instructors? And it appears that you relied heavily, and I think that was appropriate, on many FAA publications like the Pilot Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, the Airplane Flying Handbook, and others. And I'm curious, some of your illustrations appear to have been borrowed from those publications, which we can do because they're not copywritten. And others, you have some excellent illustrations in the book. Can you tell us a little bit about the CFI input into what you did? Did you extensively use those FAA publications? And who did those, particularly those plain drawings that are so good in your manuscript?
Thank you. Thank you very much. It has been, I feel so grateful when I hear pilots say that they enjoy the book, because that means that means it's a success in my own book. The process of writing the book was this. I finished the check ride, and about a week later, I sat down and I started writing. And in about 3 months, I wrote the book. But it was nowhere near complete. And at that point, I shared it with a whole bunch of CFIs who I knew and said, what's wrong here? What have I said? Even small things that I may have said. And I had nightmares all, for the next year and a half that something would slip through the cracks that was absolutely wrong. And so I had a lot of people look at it. And I'm very, very grateful to them. The drawings were, you're right, some of them derive from the FAA manuals that are not copyrighted, but I always redid them. And I worked with an illustrator named Jim Kopp, who was incredibly patient and learned a lot about aviation in the process to create all of the different illustrations that I thought would help. He took a lot of time. It was about almost a full summer to just do the illustrations and get them right. Because again, in the illustrations, everything has to be right. There's no room for even minor errors. So we put a lot of effort into that.
All right. Okay.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.